So, Scott, let's start off by talking about the budget. Seems like old news now, but there's a new Leger poll that shows that apparently it's not what they say connecting with Canadians. What's the issue here?
I think it's the design of the budget. And in many ways, you have to assume this was a deliberate choice on the part of Mark Carney and the government, because it is not a budget that directs a bunch of street level measures. Here's a specific tax cut. Here's a program benefit to individuals and households. It instead is like this: we're going to put a bunch of money into a bunch of tax incentives that we hope that maybe not even the first year, maybe over the course of a number of years, we'll get business to invest. Here's a bunch of money that will go into housing, and we know the cost of housing and the market is rough right now, so it probably won't take effect right away, but maybe over the course of 5-6 years, it's going to really make a healthier environment. Here's a bunch of money on defense, which by definition is going to take a long time to filter through, because we're hoping it'll spin off all these new industries and innovative, dual purpose outcomes. So it's almost a conceptual budget. It's kind of like a structural budget. We want to nudge the economy. And, we're all kind of wandering around going, yeah, but wait, what about me, man?
Yeah, right.
And so I just think they kind of got what they bargained for. And I think it's a really intriguing choice. It almost makes me think the Prime Minister figured, I want to alter the economy. This is my one shot at it. Probably by next year, I'll be in a political crisis, or I'll want to call an election, or Donald Trump will have blown up Canada, U.S., Mexico free trade, and I'll have to be putting in a bunch of support and relief programs. So that's kind of my take, but it leaves the government vulnerable because, you say, well, we're running a $78 billion deficit, and I don't feel like I'm a beneficiary. It's a little political risk in there.
It is interesting, though, they didn't really talk much, but there is a tax cut in here for some Canadians, but it really wasn't highlighted, was it?
No, they really. And there are a bunch of those. There are benefits baked in, and there's no rule that says you can only talk about what you put in the exact budget. He's only been in office for 6 months. His first act was to cut the middle class tax rate, which will benefit folks by $800-900 a year, depending on how much you make. So, there is a question of how does this government communicate? Why didn't it decide to try to connect more with Canadians? I'll tell you one thing, and this is an argument that I would have if I was working there. They passed this law like 10 years ago, the Trudeau guys, saying that the federal government will not advertise on its programs and its initiatives unless they're seen by the Auditor General. And they're turned into like boring, drab public service announcements, right? And so I think they've robbed themselves of a tool to connect with people, because no one's reading the newspaper, man. So how do you get your message out? Well, you get it out by advertising. You advertise on the podcasts that people listen to, on the radio that they listen while they drive home, and on Hockey Night in Canada. That is what you do.
There's Canada for you. But by the way, I will point out that they're out there selling this now. We have Francois-Philippe Champagne in town here, actually, I think tomorrow. Mark Carney's going to be here on Friday. So they're out on the road. They're out there pitching this thing, though, are they not?
They are. Don't get me wrong. But you know what, man? When I worked for Paul Martin when he was finance minister 30 years ago, and I'm only 33. When we did this 3 decades ago, that's what we did. Okay, we're going to go to Montreal. We're going to speak to, the chamber. Yeah. Then we're going to meet with some stakeholders, and we're going to fly by CJID. You do that circuit. It's a different media environment. It's a different world now. I think you have to use paid media. I think you have to use advertising. I'm sure you're going to have a great interview, but let's be honest, it doesn't punch through the way it did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
No question. All right, let me move on to something I asked our listeners today. There's a new Leger poll. We were talking to Sébastien Dallaire from there earlier on. If the news could get any worse for François Legault and the CAQ, there'd be no news at all, because here you go again, worst numbers since he was elected. That's 8 years ago. The question I asked was, is it time for him to step down? There are comparisons, of course, to Justin Trudeau before he decided to finally, call it a day. But what I pointed out to Scott, and I'm curious, and I know how in tune you are with Quebec politics, it seems the biggest difference, of course, is François Legault is his party. Justin Trudeau is just part of a party. How significant a difference do you think that is? And does that play into him deciding to stick it out or not?
Well, I think it's a really important point. It's a critical point in a couple of ways. One, Legault is the party. It did not exist until he created it with his hands and, moved the topsoil of the political landscape in Quebec to fit the CAQ in. So that means there's a big question mark if he steps down. What is the CAQ? How does it work? Does it have any sustaining power as an institution? And that he can use that to persuade himself that, well, without me, it doesn't work. But the second factor is it feeds the inherent belief. And I've worked with prime ministers and premiers. They all find it inconceivable that someone else could do the job. Once they're in the job for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, they cannot believe. Like Paul Martin could not conceive that Stephen Harper was capable of being prime minister. Stephen Harper could not believe, I've had this conversation with him, couldn't imagine that Justin Trudeau could be prime minister. It's just the way these characters are built. And when you've created not just an election victory, but an entire political party, that self-absorption is all the greater. But I will tell you this. Numbers are numbers. Political gravity is political gravity. A year ago, going into Christmas, we're now like in the countdown, people said, well, you know what? Trudeau isn't going anywhere. He's very stubborn. He's very determined. He's not leaving. He left. Legault will leave. You can't resist numbers like this. He'll go.
When I asked the question, someone said, because these polls have been, consistently bad and they've gotten worse. And someone said, well, he's not paying attention to polls. And I said, they all pay attention to polls, but just to a degree. When you're looking at this late into your mandate, what are you thinking of yourself as Francois Legault when you keep seeing the numbers get worse and worse and worse? Because we say, you know what, ego is the only thing preventing him from leaving right now.
Well, first of all, there's this built-in belief that, you know what, I can turn it around. And frankly, only I can turn it around. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they do try to ignore the polls, particularly when the polls suck. So I'm sure he is trying to ignore the polls. But the third thing, and this is the killer, the third thing is, even when you get behind a good issue, even when you're championing something that's on the numbers, as we like to say in the business, right? Something, well, boss, this is polling at 64%, and the government's polling at 23%. So we're fishing in a pool that's 43% better than we are already. Okay, great. The public does a discount. The public says the only reason you're lining up on that popular issue is because you're so desperate and you're looking for votes. So your motives get baked into how people read things. And it almost means like you take flack for doing something wrong and you get no credit for doing something right because people think you're just doing it to cling on, to hang on, to somehow resuscitate yourself. It is a bad vortex. You need an external threat to reverse the situation when you're in a political spot like Legault. Nothing that happens within Quebec can fix his wagon. He would need an external threat where all of Quebec felt threatened. He champions Quebec, and then people rally to his side out of a sense of national fervor.
I guess that thing here might be a referendum or the threat of separation, but he couldn't do that because he's kind of halfway there to begin with. Okay. Last thing I want to ask about, we spoke to Annie Bergeron-Oliver. Tomorrow's a big day. A lot of announcements apparently to be made. Some have already been leaked. Am I reading this right, Scott? Speculation we could see a high-speed rail announcement?
It's not. It's on the list. People have been musing about it. I noticed that it hasn't been mentioned. So when you're leaking stuff, like when I think back, okay, when I'm in the Prime Minister's office and we're preparing for a budget or a big announcement like this, and it's a list of things, you chum the waters by leaking 2 or 3 of the items, get people excited, make certain that you line up some interest, but you hold 1 or 2 back. You hold 1 or 2 back to make news that day. You don't want all the news out in advance because then there's nothing new for people to cover and they just ask you, well, what's wrong? You want them to report something new. So the absence of the high-speed rail, the Alto project, the fact that it hasn't been mentioned in any of these advanced media leaks makes me wonder all the more whether it might be in there.
Wouldn't that be something, huh? How many years we've been talking about a high-speed train? 20? 25?
I'm 57 years old, and my grandfather told me to stop talking about it.
There you go.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like, knock it off. It'll never happen.
Apparently you've been drinking. You're only 33, Scott. I just wanted to remind you.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah,
Scott Reid, thank you.
Confused.
Yeah, it happens when you're that old. Thank you,
or
Scott.
that young.
We'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This
is bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years.
And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.